In 1853, disagreements over the declining Ottoman Empire sparked the first major European conflict since Napoleon, pitting Britain, France, and the Ottomans against the Russian Empire. I'm the Wolf of 1918, and in this episode of Lighting the Powderkeg, we'll be taking a look at how a careful game of influence over the sick man of Europe had spiraled completely out of control. By the late 1840s, the Ottoman Empire had fallen into such decline that they couldn't do much but accept their fate of relying on some other great power to support their dying empire. Meanwhile, Russia relied on Ottoman cooperation. Back in the early 1800s, events such as the Greek War of Independence had shown just how vulnerable the Russian economy was when the Ottomans closed off the Dardanelles to Russian trade. This huge amount of reliance forced Russia into a different diplomatic strategy with the Ottomans. Instead of going to war to keep the Dardanelles open, Russia had taken moves to simply increase the Ottoman reliance on Russia. The Ottoman Empire didn't have much of a choice in the matter. Most of the other great powers didn't really care about the Ottomans and saw their far-flung empire as ripe for picking apart. This ended up with two empires that disliked each other working together to some extent. The 1848 revolutions in the Romanian principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia did bring them closer together after Russia assisted in suppressing the uprising, but the Ottomans were still extremely worried that Russia was using it as an attempt to seize more Ottoman territory. Seeking any other possible option, they began warming up to France, who, under Napoleon III, had started making moves to sway the Ottomans away from his rival, Russia, in order to raise public opinion of him to keep his newly formed Second French Empire from collapsing. Now, you may be wondering where Britain comes into this mess. See, by the 1830s, Britain had grown worried about their commercial and colonial interests in the Middle East and India. Russia was one of the few, if not only major threat to them, and the Ottomans stood as the only major bulwark against Russian expansion. Britain was quick to step in to support the Turks against Russia. Although Nicholas I would make the claim that Russia had no further goals for expansionism, rather that Russia simply wanted to protect the Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire, his demands towards the Ottomans effectively would have put their Balkan territories under pseudo-Russian control. By 1853, tensions were beginning to get worse, and both Russia and France began making risky diplomatic moves. It had mostly started when Napoleon III, in order to try and restore French prestige, began challenging Russian religious authority within Palestine in 1851, offering up a treaty with the Ottomans. This move threatened Russian influence over the Ottomans as well as the Russian authority with the Orthodox Christians outside their empire. Russia put pressure on the Ottomans, citing previous treaties dating back to the 1750s and 1770s. They soon renounced the proposed treaty with France. In response, Napoleon III would escalate matters by sending the Charlemont, a ship of the line, to the Black Sea in violation of the London Straits Convention. This show of gunboat diplomacy was successful, and the Ottoman Sultan, Sultan Abdülmecid I, signed a new treaty, confirming France and the Roman Catholic Church as the supreme authority over the holy places within the Ottoman Empire. Russia, in response to this Ottoman treachery, deployed two army corps above the Danube River, threatening the Ottoman land to the south. Several months of further diplomatic maneuvering and blundering would occur, but in June 1853, Russia would proceed with the invasion of the Ottoman Empire with 80,000 troops. In response to the Russian army moving into the Ottoman-controlled Balkans, Britain maneuvered a fleet into the Dardanelles, joined by another fleet sent by France in preparation for a war that continued to look more and more likely. Meanwhile, the various European powers made a last-ditch effort to avoid a war, drawing up a proposed peace agreement. While Nicholas I approved, Abdülmecid I of the Ottoman Empire found the wording of the agreement open to interpretation. Further attempts to fix these issues were rejected by the Russians, who moved their Black Sea fleet into action. On the 23rd of November, a Russian fleet discovered the Ottoman fleet harbored in the city of Sinop. Taking advantage of this, the Russians launched an attack, destroying two ships and severely damaging the rest. This slaughter of the Ottoman fleet while peace talks were still underway, coupled with the Russian refusal to withdraw its armies from the Balkans, shifted public opinion in Britain and France against Russia, giving both nations the support they needed to declare war. Acting quickly, Britain sent a small group of engineers to begin working on closing off the Dardanelles to Russian ships in order to keep their fleet from escaping to the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the British began strategizing with the French for the ensuing conflict. While all this was transpiring, the Russian and Ottoman armies started running into each other in several battles across the Danube. The first, the Battle of Oltineta, started when an Ottoman force of 8,000 men crossed the Danube and attacked the Russian detachment of 6,000 on November 4th. The Ottomans, surprisingly, successfully beat the Russians back. However, they later gave up the position, maneuvering over and capturing the city of Caliphate. The Russian attempts to take back the city were all beaten back, at the cost of some 50,000 Russian troops total, compared to the 20,000 Ottoman casualties. By the end of 1853, the Russians had been unable to gain any land past the Danube River. They would try again, making actual gains until they reached Trajan's Wall and were finally halted. Although they made attempts to break through, such as the failed siege of Silistria in April of 1854, they finally had to retreat back due to Austrian intervention against the Russian offensive. This ran counter to what Nicholas I had expected, as he had assumed Austria would side with Russia due to the help they received from Nicholas I during the 1848 revolutions. This aggressive and self-serving move by Austria would have long-lasting implications on not just Austro-Russian relations, but also on the history of Europe. It could even be said the simple move created the First World War 60 years before Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. During all this, Britain and France weren't able to offer up much help. Although they had the manpower in the region, they were waiting for supplies before they could properly help. When they finally had everything in order, they landed on the Black Sea coast near Varna. They did little after landing, however. One individual, known as Karl Marx, would quip, "There they are, the French doing nothing and the British helping them as fast as possible." In August 1854, the Allies would propose the 4 points to end the war. It stated that Russia would give up its protectorate over the Danubian principalities, open the Danube to foreign commerce, a revision of the Straits Convention of 1841 which allowed only Russian or Ottoman fleets to operate in the Black Sea, and for Russia to abandon any claim of interference in the Ottoman Empire on behalf of the Orthodox Christians. Obviously refusing to negotiate, Russia forced the hands of the Allies into further action. They agreed that Austria would continue occupying the Danubian principalities as a neutral peacekeeper while France and Britain started military operations in the Crimea. Although called the Crimean War, there were plenty of operations elsewhere. Naval skirmishes in the Pacific, operations in the White Sea, huge attacks in the Baltic, and military operations in the Caucasus region were all important parts of the war. However, we can't cover the entire war for the sake of time, so we'll keep focused on the Crimean aspect. Finally getting sent into action, the British and French troops landed at Calamita Bay on September 14, 1854. On the 20th of September, the Allied forces engaged a Russian army in the Battle of Alma. The Russians were shoved back, suffering some 5,000 casualties compared to the Allies' 4,100. Being free from their beachhead, the Allies set their sights on Sevastopol. Deciding to attack it from the south, the armies began maneuvering and finally laid siege on October 17, 1854. Quickly, the Allied lines began to thin due to a severe cholera outbreak. The Russians attempted to take advantage of this through an attack on the Allied supply lines south of Sevastopol at the Balaclava. After some maneuvering, the battle commenced. The Russians had planned to bypass the entrenched French and British positions by assaulting the supply lines leading to them in order to cut them off. This began with a cavalry charge, quickly beat back. The British responded with their own countercharges when the Russians began pulling back. They might have been able to properly take advantage of the retreat had a series of miscommunication not occurred. This ended up leading to the infamous Charge of the Light Brigade, which effectively halted the British advance. By the end of the fighting, both sides were exhausted and had suffered around 600 casualties each. Now, Britain and France could focus on besieging of Sevastopol, in that they did. Throughout the winter, the city was laid siege to, both sides suffering heavy losses as disease swept through the camps. The winter conditions had destroyed much of the Allied supplies, leading to further deaths as men starved and the malnourished became sicker. Still, the Allies continued the siege. They knew taking the fortress would bring Russia to the point of desperation as their economy continued to deteriorate. By September 1855, the Russians were on their last legs after suffering some 102,000 casualties, and on the 11th they surrendered. By the time the Allies had occupied the city, they had lost some 128,000 killed. By now, the closure of trade routes through the Baltic and Black Seas had crippled the Russian economy. Both the lower and upper classes began clamoring for changes within the military and government, and Russian society seemed on the verge of collapse. Things became worse on the 2nd of March, 1855, with Nicholas I dying from pneumonia. Many believe he had committed passive suicide by refusing treatment. Regardless, the Russian Empire had become further destabilized by the sudden change in leadership, and Alexander I took control of an empire with an increasingly hostile populace and an army consistently on its back foot in a war it had been unable to win. A few months after the fall of Sevastopol in September, Alexander II sought peace with the Allies. Although Britain wanted to continue the war, both France and Austria jumped at the opportunity to end the conflict, and peace talks began in Paris. After only a month of discussion, the talks concluded with the Treaty of Paris on March 30th, 1856. The Ottoman Empire would take control over Kars, along with any territory under Russian occupation. Russia, for their part, had all territory occupied by the Allies restored to their control. The Black Sea was also made into a demilitarized zone between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. The most important thing to come of the end of the war, however, was a recognition of Ottoman sovereignty to control their own policies without foreign interference. However, the Ottoman Empire had been completely bankrupted during the war, creating a serious long-term economic crisis that may have attributed to the sudden collapse of the Turkish European holdings over the next decades. By the end of the conflict, Napoleon III had strengthened his hold on France. Britain had increased their influence over European politics, the Ottomans had regained a semblance of internal and foreign integrity, and the Austrian Empire had been able to secure a large amount of influence within the ever-destabilizing Balkan provinces. Russia had been the big loser out of the entire ordeal, further destabilized and suffering a huge loss of prestige. Many within the country used the war as a way to put pressure on the Tsar to institute modernization across the empire. The war had shifted the balance of power in Europe towards the West, and the blueprint for further crisis in the Balkans had been laid. Thank you all for watching this long and coming episode of Lighting the Powderkeg. This script has been written for quite a while, and I've just now begun to actually get back into making videos, and I was like, hey, might as well actually make this video and release it before I get started on more aviation videos and hopefully write episode 6. Thank you all for the continued support over the past couple years. I know the past 2 years especially have been rather inconsistent with video uploads, but I appreciate all the support you guys have given me. I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos, as the first weekly aviation video will be coming out on January 7th of this year, so just in about 5 or 4 days, depending on when this video actually gets uploaded. If you guys like the video, be sure to leave a comment, subscribe, hit the like button. All that helps the video's exposure. Share with people who you think might enjoy this type of video. I know this video probably looks a little bit lazily done, but I appreciate the support regardless. Yeah, if you guys are interested in keeping up with the community, there is a Discord server. You can follow me on Instagram. There's a lot of different things that you can go to, and you can find links to all of these within the description of the video below. Starting the week after next, there will be the ability to see videos about 2 days before they're actually released if you are a channel member. Obviously, this is one of the only major perks of being a channel member, so it's just one of the perks that I get from being monetized by YouTube. So if you guys want to join it and you guys want to get videos early, along with a couple other small perks, go for it. It's definitely there, and I don't want to make any promises that I don't know if I'll be able to keep yet, but it's definitely something that you guys can do if you feel like supporting the channel a little bit more. But I appreciate you guys watching and being here to support the channel.